Well, thank you very much, Shani, and thank you very much, Mannkal, for all the fantastic work that you do over in WA fighting for liberty, and not the least of which is organising today's conference. So a few months ago, I was in Washington, DC. I had the great honour to visit some organisations not too dissimilar from Mannkal over there. And one of the organisations I visited was the Great Leadership Institute, and a gentleman by the name of Morton Blackwell comes out. Now, this gentleman has been founded the Leadership Institute, I can't give an exact date, I think it was about 40, 50, 60 years ago, and it does extraordinary work on campus, on training people. And he comes up, he says, "You're from Australia?" I say, yes. He said, "Do you know Ron Manners?" Of course. Well, you've got to give this tie to him. So everyone today will see Ron wearing the fantastic Adam Smith tie. Do compliment him on it. It looks amazing. And I think you can order one for the Leadership Institute online. I'd strongly recommend it. So I have the great misfortune of speaking after so many fantastic previous speakers here today. If you look through it, it goes Professor, Doctor, Reverend, Doctor, Mister. So there's lowering my expectations here about what we're going to do. What I really want to speak today is about enlightenment and the place that we all sit in that, and the role we all have in what the enlightenment is. And I just want to start by first opening a bit of a dialogue with you. Who in this room, and particularly this is targeted to students, has not said something in class because you're scared about the way people are going to react to it? You're scared at the way. Put up your hand if you felt like you've been through that. I think that's most students here. Put up your hand if you've written something in an essay. This is probably particularly targeted at kind of politics, economic students, or politics, sociology, social science students, that you didn't necessarily believe, but you wanted to get a better mark. That's the problem. This is the precise problem we face. It's the issue that it's the inability to what, in a sense, achieve enlightenment by being truthful to ourselves. And what I'm going to focus on today is the notion of enlightenment, not necessarily the enlightenment, the historical process, but enlightenment itself. And it was, enlightenment is man's emergence from self-imposed knowledge, and that was what German philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote in the brilliant essay, What is Enlightenment? He defines knowledge as the man's ability to use one's own understanding without another's guidance. Kant argues that in order to achieve enlightenment, you need one thing: freedom to make use of one's reason in all matters. This means the ability to argue, to debate, to explore ideas in an open and honest way. And it is only through that debate that we can actually achieve any resemblance of progress. Both teachers and learners go to sleep at their posts as soon as there is no enemy in the field, as J.S. Mill wrote in On Liberty. In my view, enlightenment, more than anything else, is the West's secret weapon. I think Caspar referred to that earlier when he talks about reason, this idea that we are willing to enlighten ourselves through that process. And in what you'll notice, and some great economists call this the hockey stick, if you look at the last 2,000 years of the global economy, of economic growth, what you'll notice is the hockey stick effect. So you'll notice it's pretty much stable for probably about 1,800 years, and then it goes bang, it goes zips upwards. The amazing hockey stick effect is that point of reason. It's the point when we started to use our capacity to argue with each other, to attempt to pursue truth in order to improve the human condition in that process. This is the very scientific process at its core. Now, before that process, before enlightenment, life really was in a Hobbesian style way, nasty, British and short. We didn't have the capacity to achieve very much when we were held down in a dark age, where we were incapable of using our capacity as humans to seek out truth. What we're seeing today, and I think we have to be careful here, not assuming that it's every university academic or every member of the media or every grand conspiracy, but it is a small, disproportionately influential number of people who come from a certain ideological perspective in which they quite frankly don't believe in the existence of an objective truth, as the previous speaker was getting to, which is fundamentally quite dangerous to the position of university campuses. And our story really does begin at universities, because that's unfortunately where intellectual strains can both prosper and for better and for worse. and always have been, I suppose, in a sense. Universities do have a public responsibility. They're responsible in the sense that they're publicly funded, that they're established by government legislation. They like to pretend that they have no kind of responsibility to act in a certain way, but unfortunately for them, they also want to be a public institution. They also want your money, all our money. What we've seen today across many campuses across the West, speakers are cancelled and violently protested because of certain ideas they disagree with. Students are self-censoring for fear that they might be told off in class or get a lower mark. We're seeing things like trigger warnings develop, alerts before content that people might find challenging. We're seeing safe spaces coddling students from intellectual challenge. We're seeing activists demanding censorship of certain ideas in classes that they dislike. Meanwhile, we've seen a proliferation of speech codes which restrict, in a formal sense, what people can say on campuses all across the Anglosphere. And in a sense, this is really a problem that isn't just in Australia. It is a problem particularly that we see across Canada, US, Australia, UK, probably more so than anywhere else, where this kind of ferocious culture of censorship has really formed on campuses. The incidents that do receive attention, and there are many of them, are unfortunately just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is happening below the surface, and there is a lot going on. And they really do reflect a deeper ideology, a deeper sense of what the university has become. And it's really that the university has transformed from truth-seeking entities to activist-seeking entities with a particular ideological perspective that they're trying to further in that process. And this really reflects the change in the modern left, which historically, in a sense, you could say Marxism was at least aspired, falsely so, but aspired to be a scientific method. It was a historical process that the inevitability of Marxism, Marx would talk about. You'd see the capitalist system and the contradictions within it fall apart, and then you'd have the rise up against the bourgeois by the proletariat. Now, unfortunately for Marx, we're still alive and strong. We're not perfect, but capitalism has not fallen. In fact, the places that fell to communism were in fact places that had quite weak bourgeois, and as a consequence of that, the logic of it ended up falling down. Particularly the logic fell apart as the reality of Marxist societies became something that after enough time the left came to acknowledge, I suppose, in a sense that, well, maybe that wasn't the kind of society we really do want to build. We don't want to build an oppressed society where everyone is extremely poor and unfree. So they effectively gave up on the classical Marxist idea of progress, of trying to raise the proletariat's living standards. However, they did find a new ideology that derives from it, but is, I would say, quite separate from the classical Marxists, which is really a postmodernist sense, which is this rejection of the Enlightenment. It's a rejection of progress, a rejection of truth, a rejection of liberal notions and ideals of the rule of law and democracy in that process, and instead of focus on power. That's really where the postmodernists have their love. It's like Foucault will talk about knowledge is power. It's all about the dynamics between different groups within society and mediating that power relationship. They focus a lot on language, and this is where the speech element comes into it. Talk relentlessly about discourse. You've probably all heard, anyone who say politics, you hear your lecturers talk about discourse a lot. It's their favourite word. In a sense, the way they see they claim that there is effectively, in an almost Marxist-type way, a superstructured discourse, a way people talk that is oppressive to people by virtue of the language that they use. As a consequence of that, they feel like they need to break down the discourse. They need to act in a certain way where they're relentlessly critical of the people they perceive to be powerful in order to break down the discourse and replace it with their chosen discourses. They want to change how society functions in that way. I think somebody who really did get this idea very well and get this idea of trying to manipulate society by changing discourses, of course, was George Orwell's 1984, when you have Brian says to Winston, who controls the future, who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past. And O'Brien, in this kind of long dialogue to Winston, has the ideology behind the kind of 1984 world, which he gets referred to a lot, this idea of surveillance controlling society. You believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe that the nature of reality is self-evident. When you go to value yourself in thinking that you see something, you assume that everyone else also sees the same thing as you. But I tell you, Winston, the reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. Not in the individual mind, which can make mistakes, and in any case, soon purges, soon dies. Only in the mind of the party, which is concrete and immortal. And this is the whole premise of the authoritarian mission, which is to humans being malleable entities which are easily controlled by the discourses that they hear and by the reality that is told to them. So therefore, the logic of the modern left is, well, we can achieve what we want to achieve effectively through censorship, which is if we shut down ideas in which we dislike. Now this is, luckily it's a mistreatment of the nature of humans. It's the nature of us that we actually do want to have our own perspectives, the fact that we do want to come to believe things and seek out truth. And that reason is actually why I have a great lot of confidence. It's why I have optimism. It's why I don't think these people will end up living, because will end up winning, is because I don't think that they can succeed. Identity politics, as the previous speaker was getting to, really gives postmodernism practical meaning. It defines who the oppressor is and who the oppressed is. The Marxists typically historically focus on class, given up on class. I think that's probably got a lot to do with the fact that, relatively speaking, Australian society is quite wealthy, and it's very hard to make the kind of arguments you would have made in 19th century England to make them today. So you need to find a new group in which you can call victim and a new group in which you can call the powerful, which of course then you get to race and gender and sexuality as the core focus of what this is. So the owner of the means of production is no longer the enemy, it's the white straight male who, through the language he uses, the discourse, exercise power and domination to the detriment of minorities. Now, in a sense, identity politics is not necessarily purely a bad thing. And in fact, it can be very useful and it can be very necessary at times if what you're seeking out is for everyone to be treated equally. It's, of course, the first wave feminists argued that all women should be treated equally by society and therefore should have the right to vote like everybody else. Or Martin Luther King Jr., who said,